So now that we have an actual database with information in there, let's go ahead and see how to read from it. So let's go to our text editor here, and we have a connection here. So here it's telling me I'm returning the instance right there. So let's give it a test run. Let me go to my index page here, and right after there, what I want to do is print readable. So I just want to see what was returned. So I will say data is equal to. So now instead of creating a new instance of DB class, all I'm going to do is say DB like that, double colon like this. And then I'm going to say, what do I need to say here? Wait a minute, I'm getting lost. This is table, right? Okay, so table. And the table we want to set is users, like that. So that's enough. And now I want to print readable what data was returned. Simple as that. Okay, so all we're doing is running a function in a static manner. So I expect it to return an instance of the DB class. So refresh. And there you go, it has returned a DB object, which is correct. Okay, so let's come back here and add a little bit more. So now I want it to actually do some reading, which will be done in the select and then select all. So we have to have this say select like so, and then all. Now, the reason we have to add another function here, we can simply do the querying here in select, but the reason I don't want to do the query here is because sometimes I want to add a where clause at the end here. So in order to do that, I need this to return the instance, just like we are doing with this one, where we return the instance. And then so if I'm returning the instance, I can't return the data here at the same time. So to return, because what happens in a chain like this is this data will only, whatever will go in here is what was returned by the very last function here. So if I allow it to return data here, then I can't return an instance, which means if I wanted to add something else here, I can't do that. So I can't add the where clause. So we do it like this. So select all, and then sometimes it will be select where, and then we put a where clause, and then sometimes it will be select get one or something. So let's see how we can design the select and all here. So the first thing we must do in the select part here is to return the instance, of course. So let's make sure, because we know that this is a function in the middle, so it must return an instance. Okay, so then this will be the same with the update as well. So I can do that just now, like so. All right, the rest, these will be at the end, so we don't need to return an instance, we will return some data. Where can be at the end as well, so we won't return an instance. So let's deal with select. So what does select have as information? First of all, it has a connection, and then it has a table name, so which is pretty good. That's good to begin with. So what I want to do in the select is to create a query to save to this query here. So let me go down here and say, since I know that this is in the select function, which means the query will always be equal to select, that's how it will always start. So I'm just going to do this query like this query. So I'm putting this in an instance, in this instance right here, the query right there. I want it particular to this instance, and I'm going to say this query is equal to select all from. So now the table here is unknown because the table will be supplied by the user. So we're going to use self table. So what we are doing here is we're using the table that was supplied in here. and then we sent it to there, and then now we're retrieving it from there and putting it here as part of our query. And then let me just leave an empty space like so, because whenever I concatenate something here at the end, I don't want it to be right next to the table, which may change what the text is saying. So I'll leave a space like so. So this query is good. So this is the query right now. Select all from users, because this is going to be users, of course. And then we're going to return self, the instance, the self instance. But we don't want to run the query in here. We just want to set the query. In the update here, we're going to be setting a very different kind of query that suits the update as well. But since this is a select, that's why we are doing this. And then once we are done with this, this is done for the select. And then let's come back here and see what we have. So we've selected, created the query. So this is for the connection and selecting a table. This is for creating the query. And this is for actually doing the query. So let's do the query in all. So where is all? It's right there. Okay, so once all is called in, we have to run a query here. So sometimes, where is this? Oh, no, that will only work in the where clause. Okay, so on the or here, yeah, let's do what we can for now. So first thing is first, let's determine what we want to return. We want to return some data. Sometimes we'll be forced to return false if the data was not found. So let's put those two there just as a reminder. And then what do? We have a query already existing, which is in this query like so. But then we also have a connection. So what I want to do is create a statement, because we are using prepared statements. So I'm going to abbreviate with STM like so. I'm going to say STM is equal to, now I need a connection in order to prepare this. Now the connection is already existing in self con like that. That is the connection. So let's do that. Where is this? Self con. Okay, there we go. That's the connection. And then let's do prepare like so. Okay. What we need to prepare is the query. So that is the query right there. And then we're going to have a result. Actually, here we're just going to check if it's working by doing an execution. So we're going to say check is equal to statement execute like that. Now, sometimes when doing an execution, we may need some data here. No, actually, this is not gonna work out. Yeah. Okay, bear with me here for a second. Once we check there, we're going to try and determine if the query went well. So to do that, we're just going to have an if statement and check if the check is true or false. So if it's true, then things went well, and then we can return some data. But not so fast. We need a result. So I'm going to say result is equal to statement fetch all like that. That isn't fetch at all. Okay, so I wanted to fetch objects because this is object oriented. So I want PDO objects like that. So I'm going to use the PDO class and tell it to fetch OBJs. If you want arrays, you can use ASOC like that. But I want objects, so I'll use OBJ like that. Okay. Now it's important to determine if the result, I think result is irrelevant. Let me use data. So I'm going to check. It's very possible for it to return an empty array. Okay, so you have to check if is array data. Now sometimes it can return false, or it can return an empty array, or it can return an array with actual items. So here we must make sure that it's an array and the count of that array is greater than 0, meaning there is something in that array, like so. And so once we get that, we have to return data. Okay, only then do we return it. If none of this happens, then we're going to end up here where we return false. Okay, but if we return here, then we won't get to this part. Goody, goody, goody. Now, the reason I was hesitant a while ago is because I don't actually need to do all this here. I need to do this here inside the run function. So I'll copy and put inside the run. Then I'll put data here, which I will, let me call it values, is equal to an empty array, like that. Because there will be times when we need to supply values. Let's say, for example, you want to create a query where you select from a particular ID. So you say select this where ID is equal to that. So those values for the ID will be in here. And then the reason is because run is going to be used to run the query from all these functions. So all is going to call run, where is also going to call run. All these functions that will be at the end here will be calling the run function. So what I didn't want is to repeat this code, because if I had put it inside or here, then it means when I'm running where, I need to run this code again, which is a waste. So don't repeat your code if you can avoid it. So here I still want to return the result. So I'm going to say return data, like so. And then I'm going to remove all this because we already have it here. All I need to do is call the run function. So here I'm just going to say this run, like that. And this is why this is a protected function, because we are only going to be calling it from inside the class itself. So in fact, I can just say return right here, this run, like so. Okay, great. Now these values here, which the reason I put it as equal to an empty array is to make it optional, so that sometimes I don't need to supply anything. But when I'm dealing with update or selecting by a particular ID, I'll have to put something. Okay, so far so good. I think we are done here. This should actually work, because we are calling table, which sets everything, and then we are calling what are we calling next? Select, yes, which sets the query and returns the instance, and then we call all, which is going to call this that will run the query. So let's try this out and refresh. And as you can see, just like that, we've connected to our database, but it's very difficult to see what data we have here. So I'm going to do an echo and add some pre-tags just to make it more visible, like this. Come back here and refresh, and there we go. So we have one record here and another record there. Okay, so good enough. We can be able to retrieve all the records here. These are all the records that exist because we chose the all thing here. But let's see if we can put a where clause there. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'll leave everything as it is, select, and then I'm just going to put a where clause there, and then put the where condition here. So I'll put this inside a string and say ID is equal to, I'll put a full colon like that, ID, so that I can take advantage of prepared statements. But once I do that, I have to give it a value for what this ID is. So we're going to supply an array here. Now, instead of me creating an array outside this and then adding values to it, I'm just going to put the array right here on the fly. The moment you put those square brackets, you're creating an array. And then the ID of the array is going to be ID because it has to match this missing value. So I'll put ID, And then of course, this is how we create an associative array. So I have to put the ID that was supplied there. So what ID do I want to give here? I want to give it ID number 2. If this was a string that I was putting here, I would do it like this, but this is a number, so I'm just putting it like so. So let me go back here and see what so there's ID number 0 and okay, actually it's here ID number 1 and ID number 2. So I want us to retrieve Mary's record here. So where ID. So let's prepare the where function here. So where is that? So exactly the way we did this, that's what we're going to do with the where function here, like so. But in our case, because we are actually supplied with a where clause like that, which was sent through here, this one right here. And then it should have an optional value for an array here in case there are values, because there are sometimes you can just say ID, where ID is equal to 2, like that. And then you forget about this. This should be able to work as well. But it's only because I want to use prepared statements to avoid being hacked, because somebody can put a different value here, a malicious value. So this is why I'm sending them as separate values like so. So I'll get this, then I will put an optional data or values like so is equal to array. So I'll put an empty array there to make it optional. And then here I will get the values and put it here. So that's why now this time when run is run, this is going to have some sort of value which should be executed here. So I'll copy that value and put it there. Okay, so this works whether the values are empty and it's an empty array or not. All right, so let's see if we can actually retrieve one record. So refresh. All right, so finally we have an error. I do love these errors. So it's saying invalid parameter number of bound variables does not match the number of tokens. So every time you see this invalid parameter number, it means the number of parameters was so you see this is a PDO exception, which is very good. The number of bound variables does not match the number of tokens. What this means is that the values supplied in here do not match the values I added here. So here I have ID is equal to ID, so which means I should supply 1, which is what I have supplied here. So why isn't this working out? So values. So let's make sure in the where clause values, and then we supply values there. Okay, that's weird. All right, so let's do some troubleshooting, shall we? So I just want to see what's inside the values here, just to know that the values are here. Actually, let me start with the very end where the run is actually happening. So let me do that here. So I just wanted to print that out from the function itself. Refresh. And as you can see, there is an array and there's a value there, which is 2. So seems pretty legit, doesn't it? So what seems to be the problem? Okay, so the problem is that we are running a where clause, but remember that we are running this query here, which was not created. Where is this? Wait, it was created in the select. Wait a minute. Okay, so the query was created here, but what query was created? The query is select all from table. This is the only query that is there, which doesn't have the value. So we didn't add the where clause here. So that's where the problem is. So the problem is that we've given it an array with values, but we haven't given it any values in the where clause. So the tokens are not the same. The query is select all from users, and that's it. So it's supposed to be where ID is equal to and so on. So here what I'm supposed to do is concatenate the query. So I'm supposed to say this query here dot, then I add to it So I'm going to add where, like so, to the end, like that. So this is why I actually left the empty space here, so that when I join it to a where clause, for example, there's a space there and it's going to make sense. Okay, so it should run now. Let me refresh this. Still saying the same problem. So this query, where, okay. Okay, so no problem here. What I will do is copy that, and then I can come here and echo the query just to see what the query has, just in case. So let's refresh. So the query doesn't have the where clause at all. So yeah, so this is the problem here. So I was supposed to say dot equals like that. The problem is I just concatenated these two and didn't assign them to, there was no equal sign to assign them to the query. So I was supposed to say this query is equal to this query and where clause, but I can still do the same thing with dot equals, which means I'm just adding to the front of this one. So I think now we should be in business. So refresh. Okay, so now we have a syntax error. It's saying a syntax error or access violation. You have an error in your SQL in syntax. Okay, so it seems that my query is wrong somewhere. So let me copy this query here and just echo it out again so I can see it over there. So let's see what query this guy is looking at. Refresh. So it's saying select all from users, and there is actually no where clause here. It's just saying from users ID is equal to ID. So very important to add the where clause to determine that. So instead of just saying where here, I'm supposed to add some actual text that says where, and then let me leave a space as well. Keep in mind that this is the, you see, with SQL you can leave as many spaces as you want, it won't cause an error. But if you don't leave a space, then you're going to join words together without a space, and that will cause problems. So you can never have too many spaces after the text, so you can put as many as you want here, there, no big deal. Okay, so let's refresh now, and finally we have a record number 2. So if I wanted a record number 1, all I need to do is change that query record 1 and then come back here and refresh. Now I have record number 1. Very good. This tells us that we are properly connected to the database and everything is working fine. The only thing is we don't want to be reading from the database from outside here. We want to be doing all this inside the classes. For example, whenever we want to access users, we should only be able to do that. We should be doing that ideally from the user class. So none of this should be happening here. But we have a solid foundation that we're going to build on in the next video.